Welcome to Impact Point, where we cut through the noise and get to the point. I'm your co-host, Mick Crnkovich, and I'm joined today by my fearless leader, Nalima Grover. And we are going to talk about knowledge management, assessment, monitoring, and evaluation as decision infrastructure and not as bureaucracy. And I'm just going to set the stage here a little bit before I introduce our guest today. Um, assessment, monitoring, and evaluation is something that is very near and dear to my heart. Between me and Nalima, we've been doing this for just about 50 years, and we've watched the U.S. government implement systems that work extremely well and those that don't. And today we'll talk about the AM&E, so assessment, monitoring, and evaluation enterprise within the U.S. security cooperation environment. Over the last decade, U.S. security cooperation has operated at a scale that is really hard to overstate. It's well over $500 billion, with activity often averaging in the tens of billions of dollars per year across arms transfers, financing, training, and other related programs. And over the long arc since 1950, the cumulative value of major security cooperation channels has reached into the trillions, underscoring just how central this enterprise has become to U.S. strategy and our global posture. That level of investment is exactly why Congress stepped in. In the 2017 National Defense Authorization Act, lawmakers made assessment, monitoring, and evaluation, again, AM&E, a mandate, embedding these requirements into the Department of War to run a standardized AM&E program to assess our partner nation needs and risks, monitor the execution of our programs, evaluate their effectiveness, and capture lessons learned. In other words, AM&E is not intended to be paperwork. It was meant to be the mechanism that keeps massive security cooperation portfolios honest, adaptable, and outcomes-driven. Fast forward to the 2026 NDAA, and the message is being reinforced. In a world of tighter scrutiny, higher stakes, and constant competition, credible evidence and decision-grade learning aren't optional. They're the only way to ensure security cooperation delivers real capability, manages risk before it becomes failure, and protects taxpayers' dollars at scale. Today's guest on Impact Point is Mick Crnkovich, a leading practitioner and one of the most candid voices in security cooperation, assessment, monitoring, and evaluation. So welcome to the show, Mick.
Thanks so much for having me. And I don't know if it's good that I'm known as the candid guy or not, but we'll find out.
I can't wait for this conversation, but, given everything that I just said, Mick, I have to say, I am highly skeptical. I know what Congress says, I know what's in the law, but what is the role and how should AM&E really be done? And, clearly there are trade-offs, right? But here we are 10 years later, 10 years post the NDAA 17 that mandated AM&E, and we are still debating what it is and how it's effective and whether or not it's effective. Tell me what that's all about, because it's obvious that policymakers aren't happy, Congress isn't happy, and taxpayers aren't happy. So if we have a totally failed way of thinking about AM&E, what's the right way to go about it?
Great setup, Marcia. First, I don't know that we're totally off the rails, but the engine is going really fast and the bridge is out, and we're not really sure if we're going to stop the train before it goes all the way off the rails. So with the 2017 NDAA, as you so rightly stated in the beginning, Congress gave very clear direction to the department in law, right? The way security cooperation had been done in the past, and this was really mostly focused on what is known as the 333 account, the International Security Cooperation Programs account, which in any given year has averaged about, $1 to $1.2 billion since the 2018 time period. Not the rest of that $500 billion with foreign military sales and foreign military financing, just to set the stage about what I'm comfortable talking about. The reason that Congress made those changes was In colloquial terms, within the security cooperation enterprise, people had referred to security cooperation previously as a peanut butter spread approach. That's where you literally just slap a big giant glob of security cooperation on one end of the bread, and spread it across to cover as much of the globe as possible, with the theory being that if everybody gets just a little bit of love, we will be able to have better access and placement, we'll establish relationships, strengthen relationships. But I would argue that approach was the exact opposite of strategic intent. There was no assessment on the very beginning of the design of security cooperation programs. There was a lot of, this is what we've done before, this has worked in other places, we're going to try that here. But there wasn't a deliberate assessment, let alone a deliberate assessment by individuals formally trained or educated as a discipline, subject matter experts in formal assessments. The additional problem that was going on during the execution of security cooperation for decades was that it was simply turned on, it ran on autopilot. Things happened, output occurred. And what I mean by output is things were provided, training was conducted, education was provided to foreign military officers and senior non-commissioned officers as part of professional military education. But there was never real-time tracking of whether the programs that were initiated were having an impact in real time. We've just never measured the effect. And so Congress again stipulated that this AM&E effort, this AM&E enterprise tied to Section 383 of that 2017 National Defense Authorization Act had to have monitoring in real time. And logically, from a financial responsibility perspective, you would assume that that was intended to determine in as close to real time as possible if we were achieving what we had set out to achieve, and if not, to ask some additional questions to determine whether we could achieve our initial goals, and if not, stop spending the money. But instead, once programs were initiated for security cooperation, almost every single time, 99 times out of 100, that program went through to completion, whether or not it was actually achieving something that would have been observable in real time or not. And then I think the thing that was really a change for the department out of that 2017 law was the evaluation side. So assessments, generally speaking, and I'll let you come in from your subject matter expertise as an AM&E professional, that assessment is designed to measure on the front end, establish a baseline so you know if you are making change over time. The evaluation on the back end looks at all of those activities retrospectively and observes the environment in which we were operating, talks to allies or partners to whom we are providing goods or services, and gets a sense, did our intervention, was there a measurable causation or correlational connection between what we did and the change in the environment, whether that's a change in the security status of that environment, whether it's a change in ally or partner behavior because of what we've provided, or even better, a change in adversary behavior based on what we have provided. Again, whether that's material, education, or training. That's a pretty big thing for the department from a cultural perspective to get on board with. They've never done that before. AM&E as a profession or a discipline, I would argue, is still not resident within the department, and the department will have to go outside of core defense contractors, defense industrial base, or other partners that we're used to working with as a department to be able to bring this expertise in. I think for a long time, from 2018, when the NDA actually kind of took effect, when it was signed, probably in, based on historical norms, January, February, March of 2018, from then until about 2022, 2023, I think we were generally on an upslope, moving in the right direction in terms of what we were trying to do and institutionalizing. I think since 2023, things have kind of fallen apart, and we can get into a lot of the reasons for why that's the case. But I think we are certainly not anywhere near where Congress wanted us to be when they wrote that law in late 2017.
I'm going to pull on that thread, Mick. Tell me the case about what happened after 2023.
So I think there's a couple things. So I was in the chair, the director for assessment, monitoring, and evaluation in the Office of the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Security Cooperation. It's gone through a couple of different name changes since then, but now it's back to, it's kind of like the artist formerly known as, it is now back to known as Security Cooperation again. And part of that process included the establishment of a contracting vehicle that would have allowed for the department to hire a single vendor, and that single vendor provided full-time equivalents or contract bodies to each of the geographic combatant commands as part of what was then called Assessment, Monitoring, and Evaluation Fusion Centers, these AFCs, that worked ostensibly within the Combatant Command Joint J5 Security Cooperation element to bring subject matter expertise into the Combatant Command, but from a holistic single vendor or single provider approach, so that all those different bodies at the combatant commands, even though they were working for an individual geographic combatant command, the staff themselves were part of one organization. And that one organization, the overall provider, was able to provide specific sets of standards, specific sets of expectations, specific SOPs on how they would do things and how they would engage and what right looked like. So there was some sense of control, or at least consistency, in how each of the geographic combatant commands were thinking through and planning and designing and eventually assessing and monitoring and evaluating all of the security cooperation initiatives that they had initiated, right? Not sure the exact time when that contract mechanism timed out, late 22, early 23. And there was initially some positive change. Some of the combatant commands themselves decided that they wanted to transfer that knowledge from a contract provided support to a fully institutionalized set of skills for capacity and capability. They would hire their own civil servant employees to become the security cooperation cell within those combatant commands. That was a great sign. That was the path to institutionalization, right? Unfortunately, only one or two commands did that. The rest of the contract mechanism fell away. Other combatant commands wanted to keep some of that capacity, so they initiated their own individual contracts that was then filled by 4, 5, 6 different vendors, each with a different approach, each with a different understanding of what assessment, monitoring, and evaluation is. And now there's no centralized control over a single contract that provided all that coverage to the enterprise. And that, I think, is a huge problem. So much so, and for the benefit of your listeners, we had a recent conversation with staffers up on the Hill about this problem and highlighted the fact that what they had intended had been becoming realized. And all of that progress, I would argue, has now sort of fallen away, or most of it at least. And the staffers were pretty surprised to hear that assessment. And I think bringing at least my sense of what reality is back to the table for them to understand how they need to put their thumb back on the scale and hold the department accountable from a congressional oversight related to initial requirements and requirements that have been updated since the 2017 NDAA. I think it left the staffers, I don't know if I'd say a little bit shook, but definitely caught them off guard a little bit about my assessment, at least, of the current environment for AM&E. And I think that fracturing of a singular vehicle is quite honestly the biggest detriment what's going on inside the AM&E enterprise at the moment.
So if I could jump in, Marcia, here just for a second, because I'm listening to this and I'm listening to you say something, Mick, but I as someone who has been steeped in the AM&E world for almost 3 decades now and built a company just doing this, I've seen a thing or two in terms of what makes these systems work and what doesn't make these systems work. And my perspective is that the requirements were imposed by Congress, but the stage was not set right from the very beginning. Because to really have an effective system, to do what the intent was, it has to be structured in a way where you are looking at the entire system, which is a combination of data, the data coming in, the process, the culture, and you have to sort of create the wrapping of systems and institutional capacity around all the three pieces. And so ensuring that you had the right contractor from the very beginning and making sure that those pieces were sort of addressed adequately was a big part of building the right foundation. And I would argue that perhaps the foundation was not set right, which is why we find ourselves in this situation. And what perplexes me, frankly, is that there's almost 3 decades of experience that the Department of War has to use in terms of what has worked and what hasn't worked. And we don't have to go and reinvent the wheel as if we are back in the early 2000s. We can really leverage everything that we have at our disposal from all the learnings that we've had over the years and really build a fairly robust system that can get to all the questions that are that we aspire to answer with a good AM&E system. So my perspective is that from the very beginning, that foundation was not set right, and not having the multiple contractors is one part of it. But I think as we look to where we need to go in the future, I do think that's a fundamental thing that we need to be thinking
Nalima,
about.
I think that's certainly fair criticism. I think the challenge will be exactly what it was in 2017 with whatever Congress directs the department to do at this point, or if a strong Department of Defense senior leader comes on stage and starts holding the department accountable from a position of authority and power, I think we'll be in a pretty good space. However, to your point about culture, uh, we're trying to bring in a new thinking about how you do security cooperation rather than what the department has been doing since security cooperation was a thing. That's a big hill to climb over and get rid of all that old institutional legacy thinking of, I did this at my last post, I'm going to do it at this post. I know that this worked in this place, I'm going to try it in this place without the actual assessment on the front end. And I think that no matter what happens, the AM&E enterprise within the department is always going to be, until complete, a build it while you're still flying the airplane kind of an effort, which is certainly leads to lack of success the way it could be if it was initiated from the very
That's
beginning,
fine.
right? So that the DoD culture is going to be a big thing that has to be overcome. I do think that the single vendor with a centralized piece of control is actually critically important to this effort so that each of the combatant commands is approaching it from a similar angle, obviously within their own regions, and there's nuance and all those kinds of things. But I think the single vendor is incredibly important. The biggest thing that I would like to offer is that this is not a skill set resident within traditional Department of Defense affiliated organizations, individuals who grew up in the Department of Defense. It's just not a core competency. So that's where some of the challenge of culture is going to come into play, because for this model to succeed, you are going to have to go to international organizations, those who worked alongside the U.S. Agency for International Development, in some instances, those who worked with the Department of State. Department of Agriculture has a fairly robust AM&E effort for a lot of the ag work they do through the Foreign Ag Service, as does Department of Commerce. Those are all very, very different cultures from what people can expect in the Department of Defense. The good news is there is, I would argue, a glut of those subject matter experts available and on the market right now. And so the department would be wise to try to recruit them into the Department of Defense. They have to learn the new culture, but they need to bring more important than anything else, that subject matter expertise of what AM&E truly is, why it's done, how it makes a difference, what's the return on investment. And then you're trying to convince all of those Department of Defense employees with whom you're working and get them to see the light the way you know it to be. And that's simply going to take time, but I believe that the department can get there. It's just going to be a slow process.
So I'm going to pose a question to both of you. If you were to give advice to DSCA, who the organization that is ultimately responsible for administering and executing assessment, monitoring, and evaluation, if you were to give them advice on how to properly procure these services, what are the requirements that you would set in place to make sure that you had the right organization, the right people, and pointed them in the path of developing a real system and implementing behavior change to adopt this culture of evidence-based decision making and what those of us who have worked in the USAID sphere before call learning.
Nalima, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I certainly can, and uh, I can tell you, Marcia, that this is not an easy task. Um, as we know, because it's institutionalizing something new and something that the department is not used to doing. So, like I said earlier, I think I see sort of the three fundamental stools here to be data, people, and culture. And so the behavior change piece has to be integrated into the solution that is developed to have a robust AM&E system. And the way we have done this before, at least in my experience, is that you have to try and simplify AM&E in a way that people can relate to it so that it becomes not just the job of just a handful of people, but it becomes something that becomes integrated into how the department functions. And to be able to do that well, you need to really have a human-centered approach to see how AM&E can solve the pain points that the various stakeholders are faced with, and how do you create information that can help them with the decision making. And that requires, creating a system that meets the needs of the stakeholders so that there's buy-in. That needs to be a very integral part of the process. The process, I believe, is just as important as the system, because to develop a good system, you need a good process. And so if we had to do it over again, I think the department should really think about one system. Okay. I think it needs to be you know, knowledge management has to be integrated and data has to be integrated into the entire process. It cannot be sitting in silos. Frankly, there is so much data sitting in a security corporation enterprise with their SOCHM system, which can be mined in so many different ways. And we can use data science to really shed light on what the data is telling us. And that has to be integrated into the AM&E sort of, uh, landscape and the solution. Um, in terms of the people piece, the human-centered approaches become really important. And in creating very simple solutions where you can build champions internally, so it doesn't become just an outside-led intervention, but becomes integrated because you're going to have internal champions, and that's how we have done it before. And the third thing would be behavior. In fact, one of the big things that I've heard, multiple times is that how do you measure change in partner behavior? But there are ways in which we can do that right now, and we should. There's a very robust science of behavioral science, really, that entire discipline that you're very well aware of, Marcia. You've done a lot of work yourself that should be integrated into security cooperation enterprise. And so I think it needs to be an integrated, holistic system that really is customized to the needs of security cooperation, meets the needs of the stakeholders, which is DSCA, but also the combatant commands, right? And there has to be, the process becomes really important where it's not just about feeding data in and getting data out, but you're engaging people around the data to see what is emerging. And that has to be part of the process. And so you need a contractor or a vendor that knows how to do this. It's not going to happen automatically. And by choosing the cheapest people in town that haven't done this before, you're going to get garbage in, garbage out. And by shortchanging the process, you're not going to get buy-in. And this is not an easy thing to do. And AM&E done right can be, you know, providing such high return on investment given the amount of money that's being spent. And I believe it's an imperative right now to do it, because not only is it taxpayer dollars at stake, but frankly, we are in an environment where there's a very changing global landscape, and we need to be effective in the security cooperation enterprise. It's one of the biggest strengths that the United States has to offer in the world today. And if we can be strategic in how we use do our AM&E and get the right data, we'll be able to be so much more effective in, guiding the activities and the strategy on the security cooperation front. So I think there's a tremendous amount at stake here, and getting the right vendor who understands and brings these holistic approaches is going to be very critical to getting a good AM&E system in place that can meet the needs of Congress and the Department of War.
But it's all true. I was going to tell you, I agree with everything you said, and I'll add some of my own thoughts to it, starting with the people, right? Actually, I'll start with Congress. So the good news is we have the law. The law has not changed. The law established the requirements for the department to have this AM&E capability resident within the security cooperation enterprise. So that's good. What we need Congress to do is to have full oversight and to hold the department accountable for what they intended to be done through AM&E, which is really to spend taxpayer dollars efficiently and effectively. That's the whole purpose. It's not to make work for anybody. It's not to make combatant command J5 staffs draft crazy amounts of paperwork. It's to show that we are being deliberate in our approach. We are choosing the things that we believe are likely to succeed, that are the most effective or the most efficient, and we have the ability to track them in real time to either invest more because we're being very successful in achieving more than we anticipated, or to turn it off and save the taxpayers' money because what we started is not working for whatever reason, right? So there's the law. On the workforce side of the house, I'm not even sure, quite honestly, where the state of this play is, but the security cooperation workforce under Defense Security Cooperation University, a subordinate element to DSCA, came up with this security cooperation workforce certification for, I believe it's all 20,000 people in the security cooperation workforce by different positions and different levels of authority. And there were these 4 different levels of certification. I think this is a great start. I don't know that it's been fully realized yet, but I do believe, Marcia and Nalima, to your points around culture, until we get every single one of those 20,000 people fully steeped in a very robust assessment, monitoring, and evaluation course, and at least make them informed about what it is and why it's so important, it's going to continue to be a culture challenge for us going forward. In addition to the security cooperation workforce, we also need to tag. It can't be voluntary. We need to tag individuals to be assessment, monitoring, and evaluation champions within DSCA and within the combatant commands. At the combatant commands, I believe that is the deputy J5s. They have their hands on the steering wheel for all the things that are going on in terms of planning around security cooperation. And I would argue the deputy J5s should be the ones most inclined to support this activity because it provides data to the decision maker to, again, turn off and not do wasteful spending, or to ramp up and achieve more than we believed was initially possible by redirecting resources that the combatant commands have at their disposal. So I think if you leverage the law that we've already got, strengthen the culture within the security cooperation workforce, and tag champions at a 1-star level at a minimum, I think you're on a great path. As it relates to kind of the single vendor solution, this is probably going to upset quite a few of my friends who happen to work for some of the traditional big firms. I don't believe that this type of activity can be done by one of the big primes. It just cannot be. These skill sets are not resident within these institutions. They do too many different things. They are a mile wide and an inch deep. In some places, they're very, very deep, but this is not one of those areas. Could the bigs go out and recruit individuals with this subject matter expertise and on their behalf do the work? They could. Are they going to be as effective as someone, some element, some organization that has been doing this work as a core part of their business for 20 or 30 years? Absolutely not. And so I think, you're seeing all this change in terms of acquisition, and DSCA is moving out from under policy over to acquisition and sustainment, and we're trying to do things quicker. So there's this period of opportunity where we can try to do something different. And I hope that the community, DSCA seniors as it were, hopefully maybe they take a look at this and this resonates with them and they say, you know what, we need to we need to review what it is we're asking for from this enterprise so we can get the right solutions into the hands of the combatant commands to be more effective when we implement all the security cooperation activities. And I think if we can address those things, I think this enterprise will be much further down the road this time next year.
So, Marcia, you have a lot of experience in doing this work. Okay. You worked at the State Department, you worked at the Department of War, you're an AM&E expert, certainly one of the best that I have worked with. And you tell me, does all of this make sense or are we missing something? Because I do think there is one piece, there are two pieces that I think we are missing right now. One is, and I'll give you my perspective, and maybe you have a different one. Number one is, I think, assessment. The assessment piece is a big part of what is missing right now in how we even think about this. We should spend a lot more time really doing a thorough assessment before we, and thinking about what are we expecting to do. And I don't see that even being discussed, frankly. And the second piece that Mick has sort of been speaking about is getting that real time information, okay, which is much more about monitoring than evaluation. And, I think in this day and age, we don't have the luxury of looking back. We need more real time information. So I'd like you to talk about maybe those 2 points and anything else that comes to your mind based on a robust AM&E system that would benefit the department as we have the opportunity right now with all the changes in play.
Sure, Nalima, and thank you for the accolades. I've been watching. I think I met you right as the NDA 17 was being released. So it's been, it's been about 10 years, and I have been watching this space. And I have talked to so many people in the security cooperation enterprise. And, I was on the team that wrote the curriculum for AM&E on the AM&E IDIQ. Um, and, I do think that the assessment piece, I don't know if it's missing, but I think it's not being done adequately. I think I think there might be some confusion about what assessment really means, and we'll get to what does AM&E really mean and how confusing is that term for people that don't do it. But assessment is really about understanding your environment, and every single partner nation is completely different. I think the only thing that you can standardize when it comes to assessment is the methodology. I think, and the amount of research and the different individuals that you speak to understand the environment, to understand the needs of our partner nations, to understand their absorptive capacity. How much can they actually accept from the United States and use it? What is the partner will? What does it look like? How can they adapt? And over the long term, are they willing to come to our aid and support us and use what we've provided them if that's what we need? And so I do think, I see in this environment that there are some individuals who are very hung up on assessment, and maybe that information doesn't get to the design aspect or the monitoring or evaluation components. But then in other areas, the security cooperation officers and the AM&E specialists that are on the ground supporting them are not assessing the partner nations in a way that allow real design to take place. And I think the results of that are staggering. We have anecdotal evidence about delivering weapons grade systems and equipment and vehicles to countries that can't use them after they've received them. So they just, these items sit on runways, which also take up space. And if assessment was really driving the design of security cooperation initiatives, the SSCIs, then you would have a baseline from which to measure the performance of these programs. And so I think, it's a vital piece. And again, it's about understanding. It's about preparing for long-term programming and making sure that the programming is actually what that country needs. It's what they want. That, I understand that we have competing priorities with a lot of our partner nations, and it's kind of reconciling some of those differences. When it comes to real-time data, Nalima, you're right. Like Socium, the design of Socium, it's very elegant. I've seen demos of it. I know that a ton of data goes in there, but getting back to the system, I don't think that the right systems are in place for the managers of security cooperation programs for them to actually make decisions in near real time, right? You're not going to change your program on a daily basis, but you should be monitoring and evaluating and meeting on a quarterly basis or at least every 6 months to see how programs are going so that you can then determine whether or not the resources that you're putting towards these programs, whether or not they're having the intended impact on the ground or the intended effect or results that you had planned for. And it's also about empowering the managers of these programs to say, we're not doing this anymore. We're pulling the plug on this and we're going to realign our resources to programs and initiatives that are demonstrating that they're making real progress.
I'll just jump in on the assessment thing if I could a little bit. So I do think that the department is far better now than it was pre-2017, 2018 around assessment, just because during that process, when we were creating what the significant security cooperation initiatives were, and that was actually done in a sister office within the DASD for security cooperation, I think they did a great job. They actually did bring in individuals who were recognized subject matter experts from the community that has done this for decades to help shape what the assessment format and template looked like to make sure they were going and asking those questions. Some of the reality challenges around security cooperation, though, that go away maybe from best practice for the subject matter experts that are familiar with AM&E, is that a lot of times in the security space, we want a partner or an ally to have a very specific capability. And that's to do a very specific thing, either in lieu of us, if they're working on their own, right? So that we don't have to go and do it. Or if they're going to be alongside of us when we get into a crisis or conflict, we want them to have a very specific capacity or capability that either doubles or fills a gap again where we don't have a specific skill set that we need to be able to execute within a specific theater. And beyond just the 1.2 billion that we were talking about before, Marcia, and to your point about foreign military sales and other things, when you get to the big ticket items like huge multi-million-dollar platforms, oftentimes we will push on an ally or a partner to choose a system, not because we think they have a gap and not because they want it, but because we need to keep our assembly lines open for specific platforms. That's just the reality of the defense industrial base, right? We can't afford to shut down the Chinook line or the M1 Abrams line in Lima, Ohio. We need someone to continue to buy them, even if we have decided that we are done with that block for 1 year or 2 years. We just can't shut the line down. Then I think it's even more important for the security cooperation officials at Post to have discussions with the allies or partners and be transparent about why we really are hoping they will continue with this platform or that platform because it's in our interest. And sure, it gives them a capability that is helpful and useful. It might not just be the one that they're most interested in, but that's the give and play or give and take within the security cooperation enterprise that I think we do have to keep in mind.
And I'm glad you say that, Mick, because I've heard that from a few people as well, that the objectives about security cooperation are sometimes not linear, and they're not, they might be aligned with our interests, and people don't really want to measure that. And so therefore there's this pushback on AM&E as to, why do we want to have this accountability and transparency, because it's nebulous and we want to keep it nebulous. What would you say to those people who are in that camp? And, why would they want an AM&E system, and how could it be, why do you think it's beneficial to them or to the United States?
Irrespective of anyone's politics, if you look at the current administration, I believe AM&E is 100% aligned with this administration's priorities. So we're talking about finding a single best qualified vendor that brings best value to the government, not measured by dollars, but value. That value is about impacting $1.2 billion or $500 billion in security cooperation assistance, right? So value is not just the value of the individual contract. Then I think you get in, so you look at the privatization piece, there's that aspect of it. And then you look at everything that happened with DOGE and finding effectiveness and finding efficiency specifically in cutting fat out of the US government's budget. AM&E is designed to do exactly that. It's designed to help you intentionally design a program that is more likely to be successful because you spent the time on the front end of that program to do everything within your power to make sure that it's successful. Now, the environment has a vote and the adversary has a vote, as do the allies and partners. So even in spite of all of that front end homework, maybe your program's not successful. But if you are not effectively monitoring and measuring, and every single thing is measurable, whether directly observable or through proxy metrics or other things, every single thing is measurable, you can make the determination to stop spending good money after bad money because the data shows you are not achieving what you set out to achieve. That is 100% in alignment with this administration. And if you can flex those resources through more flexible and more adaptive acquisition and sustainment systems, turn some money that was intended for Project A, not being successful. Project B is making pretty good traction. Let's pivot that funding to Project B and double down and achieve even more results than we believed possible. That's the effective use of taxpayer funding, and I think it's certainly in alignment with everything that this administration is talking about.
Mick, I do too, and to quote Brene Brown, if it exists, you can measure it, right? Like that is so true. Going back to what you had said earlier about format and template, I think when it comes to assessment, monitoring, and evaluation for security cooperation, for behavior change in general, I had said earlier that methodologies can be replicated, and that's what makes them evidence-based. But I think that having too many formatted templates bogs people down and constricts the kind of data that they wind up collecting. As a social scientist and an ethnographer who spent years in Afghanistan collecting data from the population in order to help military commanders make better decisions, you know, sometimes it's through a conversation that you get some of the best data that you actually need, as opposed to a set survey tool, and it's going off of the template instead of just sticking to, the 10 or 15 questions that were provided or that you developed earlier, but like really getting to the root cause of what's happening, I think takes a different kind of skill set. And we found out in almost every context that we were backing the wrong side. We had a set idea of what was happening. We had people measuring what was happening, and yet the individual who went out into the field to talk to individuals was able to come up with a completely different answer than what we had anticipated. And so, kind of going back to the format and the template, having social scientists who understand social science research methods and people who have experience with ethnographic research and dig a little bit deeper, I think would benefit DSCA and OSD policy and the combatant commands. And yes, you should have a system that they feed this information to. Yes, it should be done on a regular basis. There should be a system to guide them. But when it comes to actually collecting the data, you need to have experience to go off of. You need to have social science research background to go off of in order to get much more robust and very contextual information to feed to the commanders.
No, I think it's a good point. I think the reality of the size of the Department of Defense and how they engage through the country teams abroad, the likelihood of having a strong social science representation within the embassy as they go and talk with their security partners within the ally or partnership that we're talking about, I think is probably just a bridge too far. A lot of that work, those conversations that are real time, right, that aren't templated, but they're just conversations happen with the senior defense official, with the defense attaché, with the security cooperation officers in the day-to-day course of their work as they're engaging with the allies or partners. You're getting a sense of the things that are important to them. Plus, we also have the intelligence enterprise that is feeding us other information that needs to be harnessed and brought into that overall process. I do think it would be helpful around those AM&E fusion centers that we spoke about earlier that were part of the initial contract. And I think some of those cells are still in play at some of the combatant commands. Having someone with that type of a background, your type of a background in the J5s and the security cooperation cells would be helpful as almost like a spot checker or quality assurance. Hey, I see on your SSCI that you've designed this program. I'm sensing there's a gap. Did you talk to people about this? Did you see that? What is your sense? Could you go back and find out about this just to make sure we're pursuing the right thing? That's, I think, valuable. That quality assurance, quality control check from a social science perspective would be very helpful. The big DoD is just not going to go that route, but I think having kind of a safety valve as part of the enterprise would be very helpful.
And if I could just add to that, I agree with everything that you both have said in terms of the having that skill set, and having the expertise, especially getting all the qualitative information that could be so valuable. But I also think there's another play here, which is in terms of building the capability of the security cooperation enterprise with the training that's being done. Because, I think that's a perfect opportunity for people to really start thinking about what kind of information could be helpful and start thinking in that way. And so bringing in experiential learning in AM&E training, I think, especially when you're doing SCORE training, could be really helpful. It doesn't help anyone to sit in a theory of change class and do academic, exercises, because the application of that in the real world may be something very difficult for one to just be able to do after attending a course. And so really bringing it down to real things so that it gets integrated in the capacity of people within the security cooperation enterprise is another opportunity to get that right. While I'm saying that, I have another question popping to me where I'm going to put you on a hot seat, Mick, is so none of what I'm saying is new, right? This is all stuff that we have learned certainly in the work that we have done over the last 3 decades, and certainly there are others out there as well. Why hasn't the security corporation enterprise gotten this right? There was an opportunity. I mean, it seems to us, certainly from where we are sitting, that the understanding doesn't exist, and the tendency is to go either with the same old players or to go with the cheapest guys in town, and neither of those have worked, and they won't work. Okay, and so you just continue to throw money at things, and you collect a bunch of more data. We already have so much data sitting in the system, and we'll keep going around in circles like this. And we have some very smart people who are sitting on the inside. So why isn't it happening?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it goes back to the culture. This is a bolt-on, an add-on to the department's structures and processes, and no one was incentivized to ensure that it was successful. DSCA had a little bit of the rose pinned on them. Security cooperation in the Pentagon, when it was in policy, had a little bit of responsibility for the overall guidance and doing the evaluations kind of post facto. But within the combatant commands themselves, no one was incentivized or held accountable of you pissed away $20 million after we knew things were going bad. Why did you do that? Well, who owns that decision? Is it DSCA? Is it the implementing agency via the service? Is it the ambassador? Is it the security cooperation officer at post? Or is it the entire cell of security cooperation professionals in the J5 that have all of the information available and relevant right in front of their hands? And they had it, but how do they distill it to decide or to inform their senior leaders to make a decision? And one of the things I'll say that I'm sure is going to be relevant for both of you is technology has changed significantly since 2017. So yes, SSCIs take a lot of work, but they should take a lot of work because you're asking to spend 2, 3, 5, 20, $50 million of the taxpayers' money. And before SSCI, significant security cooperation initiatives, were developed in the 1920 time period, we literally just allowed someone to say, I'm going to spend $50 million on X because it feels like a good idea. There was zero rigor to the process. And I'm sure a lot of the old security cooperation people are going to lose their mind when I say that. However, I believe that to be true. There is at least now rigor. There's at least now a process. You must show your thinking ahead of time. Not only must you show your thinking in the assessment of the ally or the partner and why what you're proposing is going to work, you must develop a full-on monitoring plan. What are your metrics? How will you observe those metrics? Who is tagged to observe that metric? What is the periodicity required for iterative capturing the data related to that metric? And what does that all mean at the end of the day? And how does that form your decisions? And so now that we have AI and ML tools available to us, the Socium platform is already in existence. Why do we not have an AI function within that tool to help the planners or the security cooperation professionals that are writing these 5, 6, 10-page SSCI proposals to confirm or deny everything that they're putting down on paper? They have access to mountains of data. There's no way they could distill all of the data available to them at their fingertips, but AI can do it in 30 seconds. So let's give them the tools to help them be more effective. But again, that's culture. And I think, again, current administration, especially current Secretary of Defense, pushing hard on AI adoption, which I think is a good thing. Here is a perfect opportunity, right? Couldn't be any more well-timed to let a new AM&E contract under the DSCA, now that they're aligned under acquisition and sustainment, it must include AI and ML. It should be a small business set aside, and it must require AM&E subject matter expertise, measurable and demonstrable based on the individuals they propose that they would hire. And again, the good news is, unfortunately, there is a glut of AM&E professionals available for work right now, especially in Washington, D.C. Again, perfect time to try to do this right and get it back on track.
So agree with you 100%, Mick, on all of that, right? And I do think that we do have an opening right now, and the challenges that you have outlined are all surmountable, but they start with you understanding from the top level. The incentives have to be aligned with an understanding, and then the right choices have to be made. And I really hope for all of us that that is sort of being noticed right now. But I also think that there is some responsibility that we, the contractors who do this work, also have to bear in this. And my perspective is that, and Marcia, you may not like this, and some of the other AM&E professionals may not like it, but I really come at it with a very honest and frankly, this is something I've experienced, is that many, I wouldn't say all, but many AM&E professionals speak a language that only they understand, or a few people understand, and they are, professionals, and they are really steeped in that world and in that language. And if you don't understand that language, there is a huge translation issue. And I believe that when you get those people to engage with people who don't come from that world, there's a huge cultural divide here, And there's a language divide here. And I do believe that that has been a big challenge in the AM&E enterprise, is that the people that have engaged in this do not speak in plain, simple English. They speak AM&E language, which AM&E people understand, but other people don't understand, and they're lost in it. And so the value proposition of AM&E is lost because we are just caught up in language. And that's why I think that has been, I believe that has been one of the challenges uh, that again, it comes down to choosing the right people and finding AM&E people who don't speak AM&E language is not easy. That is difficult.
Absolutely. It is
Huh.
difficult. And so if I could, I think your point is a very good one. And this has to be a very deliberate choice on the part of DSCA and ANS in terms of finding the right vendor. And the reason I say that, some of the teams under the previous contract, the ones that were the most successful, had hired dyed-in-the-wool AM&E professionals, like had 2 PhDs and 3 master's degrees, and like as wonky as it gets on AM&E. Great, subject matter expert. Then they also hired someone that had come out from a specific region, a security cooperation officer that had, gotten out of service at 10 years, or someone that had retired. But that was the individual that was going to be the team lead that had the responsibility to talk to these AM&E wonks, find out what the challenge was, or what are they seeing, or what is it they're trying to do, and how do you translate that back to the J5 so it resonates for the security cooperation planners, or for the deputy J5, the combatant commander. But that translational issue is very, very real. During my time at AID, I was often referred to as the Rosetta Stone that spoke both tree hugger and knuckle dragger. And I think it is important to find similar individuals in the security cooperation space. There are plenty of soldiers who did tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and after 6 years were like, you know what, I'm out, I'm done. I'm taking my GI Bill, I'm going to Georgetown, or I'm going to University of Nebraska, or I'm going to go back and go to community college. And then they did some additional work. Now they have degrees in social science, right? They have degrees in research. There are even a few that I know that now have PhDs. One guy from 75th Ranger Regiment did like 6 different tours in Afghanistan, left service, GI Bill, and then went up and got a PhD tied directly to AM&E. Those are the individuals that need to be a part of these teams. These teams can't be composed entirely of those individuals, because you need true AM&E academic expertise in addition to operational security cooperation types, plus former service members that have now moved into this academic career. They're out there, and I think they're available now. And that's the best type of team I think we need to build in each of the combatant command J5 cells.
So should we stop calling it AM&E? Should it be called something else?
I could regale you with tales of why do we call it irregular warfare? It's gray zone, it's political warfare, it's hybrid war, right? Honestly, at the end of the day, it's the same damn thing. AM&E is MEL, is whatever else we want to call it. The process and the idea are the most important, not the name. And the process remains the same. Analyze on the front end, get a baseline, execute, monitor in real time, evaluate yourself at the ending, basically give yourself a grade. Did you achieve what you set out to achieve? And if not, apply those lessons to future planning. That's the goal. And I think there's a lot of expertise out there, but the department is still culturally not 100% ready for it.
It's good management. When we are explaining AM&E or monitoring and evaluation, MEL, MERL, those of us who have that AM&E background, we're trying to explain it to people who don't really understand it. It really is just good management of your program. It's just like you said, you understand the environment so that you can design your program to meet your objectives. And then it's checking on your program every so often to make sure you're heading toward your objectives and your targets. It's setting targets. And then, when it comes to evaluation, like, did you meet your targets or not? And if not, why? And if you did, can you do it again? Can you do it bigger? And I think, Nalima, you're 100% right. AM&E people speak AM&E all the time. And I think it goes over so many people's heads, and it doesn't have to. And Mick, to your point, I think, to be successful in this industry, you do have to find people that have the social science education, but the experience of being on the ground in this particular environment. And it's great to hear that they're out there. I'm really excited for all of them because I think that this is an industry that is very much needed, and I think it's going to continue to grow.
I agree. And you might know this figure that I'm about to throw out. Either of you, please correct me if I'm wrong. For a good program, industry standard is 3 to 5% should be spent on monitoring and evaluation of said program when you're implementing around the world. I can guarantee you that the Department of Defense budget for security cooperation on Title 10 money specific to the International Security Cooperation Programs account under DSCA is not 3% of that $1.2 billion. It's
Yeah.
not even close. So we
Yeah.
are underserving based on spending the money we should be spending that will actually yield far greater return on investment by making sure we don't piss away more good money where we shouldn't because we're monitoring it in real time. So it's an investment on the front end to make sure that you have far more resources available to you on the back end because you turned things off that were not appropriate. And we're not in that place. And I don't know if I told you this, Marcia, but when we recently spoke to some of the PSMs, when I first started my job as the director for AM&E and security cooperation in August of 2019, within the first month, I met with half of those same professional staff members that we just talked to. And one of them asked me the questions like, how much more money do you need? And I think I blew his mind because the department always asks for more money. And I said, I just need you to be patient. I need a minimum of 2 to 5 years to fully establish this program. The monies that you have already allocated to the department to do this are sufficient for now. I don't want any more money. I just need you to be patient. And after their eyes got real big and they realized I wasn't asking for money, I was asking for time. They were like, okay, I think we can do this. And then we had that time. And then a couple, 2, 3 years after I had departed and moved on, things kind of fell away to where we are now. And I think we're back in a place where we need patience. We don't need a ton of money yet because, Nalima, to your point, we need to establish the right systems at the right time, at the right pace, and then we can invest more in AM&E to actually get a lot of that money back on the back end through efficient use of programming.
In fact, I think, Mick, just to piggyback on your point, that they're probably spending a lot of money right now across the various siloed contractors that they have doing various things in silos. When I said they, meaning DSCA, DSCU, they are probably doing that. And so it may even be a net savings because when you really take stock of everything that is being spent and you look at how these systems actually need to be integrated and how you have to really take a much more precise and intentional approach in building the system that's actually going to be useful to you. You know, by bringing the pieces together, they probably will save money. Is my guess. I haven't done the math, but that's my guess. And when you do good AM&E or whatever we want to call it, I have found that the people who need the data, that need the information, they find such immense value in it that they demand it. So it's not something that they feel is necessarily an imposition. It's something that really adds value to their work. And it happens by building the right, foundation and then the right process around it. And I keep bringing knowledge management in this because knowledge management, we define it as bringing the right information to the right people at the right time. And that has to be integrated into AM&E because that's where you're going to get the right data to the right people. And the AM&E information that's being collected can be used for decision making. And if that system is not built in conjunction, then with the AM&E or as part of the AM&E system, then people don't really see the use of getting all that data. I'm collecting all this data, putting all this work, but what am I getting out of it, right? And that's why that has to be such a big part of it. So I think, that's how we need to think about it. all amazing points. So let's move to like 2 or 3 takeaways. We're talking to an audience here where we need to sort of uh, put a paint a path forward for them. What would your path be? I don't know, Marcia, what would your takeaways be? Mick, what would yours be?
So I think the biggest thing for me is based on where we are now, we need the right vendor should they decide to let a contract around AM&E for the department, which I think they should because the expertise does not exist within the department itself. That needs to be a smaller business. It needs to be a business whose core competencies are centered around assessment, monitoring, and evaluation. There's a lot of companies that do a lot of things. There's not a lot of companies whose core competency is AM&E. And I think that's where you need to start. That's one. Two, we need additional pressure from the Hill on the department, whether that's restricting OSD travel, which is a common mark in the bill when it comes out every year because the department is not doing what they were directed to do by the Congress. So you mark OSD travel. That usually tends to get attention fairly quickly. However, a bigger, more significant shock to the system would be withholding a certain percentage of the International Security Cooperation Program's account top line from DSCA so that every combatant command feels some of the pain because they are not going to get their full allocation of funding. The only thing I'm hesitant to do around that is that if we go that route, we inherently limit the combatant command's ability to maximize activities and programs with allies and partners that allow us access and placement and relationship management and all those things. So it's a double-edged sword, but something needs to change to make sure that Congress has the ability to hold the department accountable. And then I think it's a very deliberate recruiting effort to build very consistent teams in terms of structure, each of the geographic combatant commands that are executing all the security cooperation with a very solid blend of assessment, monitoring, and evaluation professionals. To Marcia's point earlier, a single social scientist dedicated to, how do you get the qualitative information from the interactions that happen on a daily basis, but then also an infusion of AI and ML tools in the security cooperation enterprise to help the officers and NCOs that are responsible for writing these proposals have the AI support and save them some time, and also dive through all of the available data to help them distill what is available to the most salient points that might inform their proposal, confirmed by the senior defense official at post, the DAT, the security cooperation official, and all of their meetings with host nation officials. Those are the things that are going to inform that social science aspect that Marcia was talking about earlier. But unless we deliberately build it in, some are going to do it and some are not. So I think we have to really write down specifically the requirements for what this is ultimately going to look like. But I think that's probably something that would set us down the right path. Marcia?
Mick, I agree with you 100% on every single point. I think it's really important for those individuals who are creating procurement to be very intentional with what they're asking for when it comes to AM&E. So instead of having a catch-all contract, you need like the AM&E is a very niche industry, and it does require a lot of thought. And I think that putting out the right procurement would be a great first step. I think the original AM&E IDIQ was really trying to get everybody there. It was really spread out. It had 4 different functional areas. And I think that those 4 areas did not operate together as a system. And so I 100% agree with you on having, a single vendor establish a system for DSCA, for the combatant commands, for OSD policy. And, it needs to encompass all of the stakeholders globally and make sure that they get the right information to the right people at the right time. And so I think that making sure that whatever firm is doing this, whatever company is doing this, really understands not just AM&E, but what happens after that, about the knowledge management, a company that understands technology and how to leverage that technology for more efficiencies. So, we've talked about Socium a bunch. Socium has tons of data. How do you extract that data and start to do real analysis on the impact of security cooperation over time? And I think understanding how to leverage technology, like you mentioned, Mick, in the analysis component, we're starting to pilot different tools and platforms for data collection in the field that feeds that information real time into a platform where you can have data analysis and data visualization that you can offer to your clients. And I think also the ability to demonstrate that you can build relationships with different stakeholders, right? It's not just about the United States military. This is about partner nations. How do you get that information and how do you translate some of that information between your partner and between the US government? Because I think, there's definitely a gap in language between AM&E specialists and and the individuals that we are providing this data and information to, but I think there's also a cultural and language barrier between our partner nations and all of the American stakeholders that are on the ground. And so I think being able to kind of translate that would also be key.
Yeah, I agree. I think the last thing I'll say on this issue, I think we are kind of at a restart point. We're not starting from scratch, but there is a bit of a
Mhm.
refreshing that needs to take place. And I think the only chance for the department to be successful now that DSCA is, I don't know if they're fully complete yet, but under acquisition and sustainment, is that the leadership in ANS, along with Washington headquarters service that has the contractual overseeing of kind of all the OSD level contracts, brings together and requires a robust industry day. I think that they should do some initial market assessment on the front end and limit that industry day to 5 to 10 of best qualified AM&E potential providers. And each firm would get one representative, and they're going to go spend several days with the individual that would ultimately write the performance work statement and be the contracting officer for a new AM&E vehicle, to sit down and say, these are the things that we think are required. And if you have 5 to 10 AM&E practitioners in a room, my guess is they'll agree on about 85% of what for sure needs to be in there. And then be a couple other outliers that the contracting officer will have to consider. But I think that would set the department on the best possible path to get the best possible solution to do all of the things that we've talked about on this chat.
Wow, that was amazing. All of what you guys said. I want to add three things from my perspective that I think is important. Number one is you talked about procurement, getting the right procurement, Marcia. I couldn't agree with you more. But also I think it's really important that that when they make a choice of the vendor, the contractor, they should look at past performance and see how has this vendor done before? Have they done anything like this? Where have they done it? And how can they serve our needs going forward? Because there's a lot of noise out there. And so really being able to get the proof points is important. The second thing that I think is really critical is the training piece. I think that needs to be integrated into all of this. And the third one, which is sort of maybe the topic for another podcast, which I believe is important as well, but perhaps we don't have time to discuss it today, is I believe that we should be bringing in systems thinking as part of AM&E in the security cooperation enterprise, because you need to look at the entire system with all the different actors and players to have a good, robust AM&E system that captures the dynamic environment and the geopolitical factors that are at play, which really make the security cooperation enterprise successful or not. And so really one needs to look at that as part of the AM&E system. But that's maybe part of podcast number 2. This has been great. So thank you, Mick and Marcia, for putting this topic on the on the podcast list for Q2 Impact and Impact Point. It's been great.
Thank you both for having me. It's been a great chat.
Thank you, Mick.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nalima.
Thanks.
So Mick and Nalima, really fantastic session today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. This is my industry. I've been in it for 20 years. Nalima, I know that you've been in it for almost 30. And, Mick, we're grateful for the really candid conversation. I think that we talked a lot about how the Department of War can get assessment, monitoring, and evaluation right. And so I'm really excited for people to hear this podcast. And for all of our listeners, please, go to our website at www.q2, so that's Q and the number 2, impact.com, or follow us on LinkedIn. And we'll see you next time on Impact Point, where we cut through the noise and get to the point.